On Lake Superior, the largest of the Great Lakes, storms can rise without warning, driving waves up to 35 feet high. On November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was caught in one of those storms. Her crew of 29 men fought desperately to keep the ship afloat. But unfortunately, Lake Superior had other plans. This is the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Lake Superior is more than just a lake, it's an inland sea. By volume, it holds more water than all the other Great Lakes combined. If you poured water from Lake Superior across North and South America, both continents would be covered in 2 to 3 feet of water. Lake Superior is surrounded by both Canada and the northern US. In this area, November gales were feared the most. Storms could form suddenly and shift without warning, and hit with a force that even veteran sailors struggled to predict. Now, the Edmund Fitzgerald was built to take on those waters. It was launched in 1958 and she was 729 feet long, and at the time, the largest ship of the Great Lakes. She carried iron ore from Duluth to the steel mills farther east, and quickly earned the nickname the Pride of the American Side. Her captain, Ernest McSorley, was an experienced sailor who actually planned to retire after this run. He knew the risks of Superior, but this voyage would be his last. On the afternoon of November 9, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald pulled away from the ore docks in Superior, Wisconsin. In her holds, more than 26,000 tons of ore bound for steel mills near Detroit and Toledo. She was a heavy ship riding low in the water. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, left port soon after, following the Fitzgerald's track across Lake Superior. It was a common practice in November that ships would often sail in pairs, sharing weather updates and keeping watch on each other in dangerous seas. The forecast called for a gale moving in from the west. Warnings came over the radio from the National Weather Service, stating winds above 40 knots, heavy snow, and building seas. But for the men who spent their lives on Superior, this was nothing new. November gales were part of the job. Captain Ernest McSorley expected a rough passage, but not an impossible one. Still, there were early signs that this storm was different. As night fell, the barometers dropped sharply. Other captains began to report heavy seas building much faster than expected. The Coast Guard began broadcasting storm warnings more urgently. By midnight, winds were already howling past 50 miles an hour. The Fitzgerald pressed on, her bow rising and slamming into the growing waves, and what had started as another run through November weather was quickly becoming a dangerous fight against a storm that was continually gaining strength. By the afternoon of November 10th, the storm was at full strength. Winds screamed across Superior at more than 60 miles an hour, driving waves as high as 25 feet. At the same time, snow squalls rolled in so thick that visibility plummeted to near zero, and you could literally watch ships vanish from radar. The Fitzgerald was already starting to show signs of wear and tear from the storm. Captain McSorley radioed the Anderson to report that 2 vent covers had been lost and a fence rail had been smashed by the pounding of the seas. To make things worse, this ship was already weighed down with a lot of cargo. In those temperatures, in the splashing water, ice may have begun to build on the rails and on the sides of the ship, further weighing her down. Despite this, McSorley tried to sound steady. Behind those words, the situation was getting worse. The Fitzgerald was limping through the storm, struggling forward into worsening seas, and every mile brought her deeper into trouble. By the evening of November 10th, the storm was at its height. Waves were reported at 35 feet, and winds tore across Lake Superior at more than 70 miles an hour. But on board the Fitzgerald, the crew was still pressing towards Whitefish Bay, knowing that its shelter may be their only safety. At 6:30 p.m., Captain McSorley radioed another ship to say the vessel was taking on water and that the pumps were working hard to keep up. He added that his radar was down and they were now depending on the Arthur M. Anderson to guide them. Even so, his voice was steady. This was a man who had seen storms before. By 7 p.m., conditions had grown even worse. The Anderson itself was battling the waves, logging wind gusts strong enough to blow the ship sideways. Their captain kept the Fitzgerald in sight on radar, calling out bearings and updates. The Fitzgerald, though battered and blind, was still pushing forward. By 7:10 p.m., McSorley's voice came across the radio one last time. Calm, almost casual, he said, "We are holding our own." Only 5 minutes later, at 7:15, the Anderson's radar screen flickered and the Fitzgerald was gone. One moment she was there, a steady green blip moving forward toward Whitefish Point, The next, nothing. No breakup, no signal, no distress call. No flares, just silence. The Andersons' captain tried again and again to raise the Fitzgerald on the radio, but nothing. He searched desperately with his binoculars for any sign of wreckage, but again, there was nothing. The ship had simply vanished. In the hours that followed, the grim reality set in. Now, when the Edmund Fitzgerald failed to arrive, the Coast Guard launched a desperate search. Through the night, cutters, aircraft, and nearby freighters battled the storm, sweeping the shipping lanes for any sign of life. What they found was heartbreaking. Life rafts torn apart, bits of debris, and a slick of diesel oil drifting on the waves. The Edmund Fitzgerald had gone down in 530 feet of water, likely breaking apart so fast, the crew never had a chance to send a signal. All 29 men were lost. Not a single body was ever recovered. In the days that followed, sonar scan revealed the Fitzgerald's final resting place. She lay broken in two in pieces on the floor of Lake Superior, more than 500 feet down. At that depth, salvaging the ship is near impossible, meaning that Lake Superior holds true to the saying that Lake Superior never gives up her dead. But even with the ship sitting 500 feet underwater, investigators would work around the clock to try and figure what happened to this ship. What exactly happened in the final minutes of the Edmund Fitzgerald is still debated. Some believe the ship suffered a structural failure. In the towering seas of Lake Superior, massive waves can bend a ship's hull, lifting the bow and stern while the middle hangs unsupported. Sailors call it hogging and sagging. A ship as heavy as the Fitzgerald, already battered and riding low, may have simply snapped under pressure. Others point to the cargo hatches. If even one wasn't fully secured, water could have poured into the holds. With each wave crashing over the deck, the Fitzgerald may have slowly been flooding under the weight that was already too much. The ship could have plunged suddenly, taking a crew with her before they even realized what was happening. And then there's the theory of the rogue wave. On that night, other ships in the area reported a phenomenon known as the Three Sisters. Three massive waves arriving in quick succession, each larger than the last. If the Fitzgerald had already lost buoyancy, those waves may have struck a final and fatal blow, rolling her under or driving her down so hard she never surfaced. No one will ever know for certain. There were no survivors, no distress calls, and no chance to record her end. All we have are the wreckage, the weather reports, and the silence of Lake Superior. And what makes this loss even harder is just how close the Fitzgerald came to making it. It sank just 21 miles short of Whitefish Bay, which would have been a safe harbor that would have ended the nightmare. 29 men were aboard, fathers, sons, husbands, men with families waiting for them at home. Instead of reunions, there were empty chairs at dinner tables across the Midwest. Ultimately, the loss of the Fitzgerald forced a change on the Great Lakes. Regulations were tightened, and mandatory survival suits issued. Storm tracking was also improved in hopes sailors would never again take November gales lightly. The Fitzgerald herself was never raised, but in 1995, divers recovered her bell and now rests at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. A replica was lowered back onto the wreck. It was engraved with the names of all 29 men, left as a memorial at the bottom of Superior. Every November, services are held at Whitefish Point and in Detroit, where the crew is remembered and the ship's bell is tolled 29 times. And beyond the shipping community, Gordon Lightfoot's haunting retelling, through his song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, gave the tragedy a voice that reached millions. What a tragic story. I can't imagine what people went through back home waiting for their loved ones to return. I just want to say thanks for joining me in this short episode. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you have a moment, check out our playlist, Against All Odds Historic Survival, for more stories like this.